Help support Name Explained by leaving a like and a comment, sharing this video, and by subscribing to the channel.
Despite there being 7,000 plus unique languages spoken on the planet today, there definitely are not 7,000 plus unique alphabets or scripts. Many languages share an alphabet/written form. Take something like the Cyrillic script, uses the written form for languages like Ukrainian, Russian, and Bulgarian, or the Arabic script, which is used for the language of Arabic, as well as a variation of it used in Persian. There's also the Devanagari script, used in languages like Hindi, Sanskrit, and Nepali, as well as the logographs shared between Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, known as Hanzi, Kanji, and Hanja, respectively. Languages are no strangers to sharing an alphabet. Yet then we have the most widely used alphabet on the planet, the Latin alphabet. The script of Rome is used by a resoundingly huge amount of languages, with some sources claiming that 3,000 languages on our planet use it as their go-to alphabet. That's around half the languages on our planet. The Latin script is of course used in Italian, which makes sense as the script originated from this country, but also other nearby languages in Europe like English, French, Dutch, Polish, Finnish, Swedish, and even Turkish. Yet the alphabet hasn't stayed in just Europe. It is expanded across the globe and is the alphabet of languages like Maori, Hawaiian, Swahili, Navajo, and the many indigenous languages of Australia. In another world, maybe every language has its own unique script. Yet we do not live in that world. We instead live on a planet where languages like Maori, which is incredibly far removed linguistically and geographically from Rome, can use the same alphabet as them. We have to wonder, why on earth is the Latin alphabet used for so many languages? The Latin alphabet's spread across written languages kind of happened in two steps, with each of those steps having their own reason for happening. The first step was the alphabet spreading beyond Rome into other parts of Europe, and then the second step being its spread across the wider world. Its initial spread across Europe can be explained fairly easily, and that is down to our good friends the Romans. They are the creators of this alphabet, but they didn't whip it up out of thin air. The Latin alphabet was heavily inspired by the nearby Etruscan alphabet. It's believed to have come into being around sometime prior to 600 BC. This humble alphabet, initially used in just a small section of the Italian peninsula, would find its way across a huge chunk of Europe thanks to the empire which sprang out of its homelands. A vast majority of Europe would find itself under the control of Rome. Rome shaped so much of Europe to this day, including the languages of the continent. Some languages found today in Europe are direct descendants of Latin. These are the Romance languages with the likes of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. It's pretty self-explanatory as to why these languages use the Latin script, like a parent giving their kid their old scarf or something. Though not everywhere which was once part of the Roman Empire speaks a Romance language, like Britain and Hungary. Yet these places even use the Latin script in their key languages due to the influence of Rome. Yet Rome did not claim the entirety of Europe. Places like Ireland and the Nordic nations never came under Roman rule, yet even their languages use the Latin script today. How languages in places like this ended up using the Latin script is not down to the influence of Rome directly, but instead due to the influence of one of Rome's greatest success stories, Christianity. Christianity grew from a small sect of Jews after the death of Jesus, eventually spinning off from Judaism to become its own religion. In its early days, it was heavily persecuted in the Roman Empire, with Rome still favouring their own gods. Over the centuries, however, it picked up some momentum. Slowly it became more accepted in Rome. Things really picked up for Christianity in Rome in 312 AD, when the ruler Constantine converted to the religion. Having Constantine as a Christian created huge waves for the religion, and by 380 it was the official religion of the empire. In just shy of 400 years, it went from despised to celebrated in Rome. Even after the fall of Western Rome, Christianity still thrived across Europe. At this time, Europe was ruled by various powers, yet Christianity was something many of these ruling powers had in common because of Rome's previous influence. One of the key reasons as to why Christianity spread so much is because of just how insistent many Christians were on spreading it. Christian missionaries would travel across Europe in hopes of bringing Christianity to new lands and speakers. In many cases, they were resoundingly successful. A key way in which missionaries helped spread their religion was through the written word, and as Christianity was so deeply tied to Rome, it meant that the language of Latin, as well as the Latin alphabet, was more or less the de facto language of the religion. So the missionaries went off across Europe to spread the word of Jesus with the Latin alphabet at their side, and they reached beyond the borders of the former Roman Empire to great success. This is a key reason as to why many European nations beyond the former claim of Rome now use the Latin alphabet too. Though many of these languages actually had their own writing systems before the arrival of Christianity and the Latin script. A notable example of this is with the runes of Old Norse. Even English used a runic script known as Fufork before it adopted the Latin script in around the 11th century. Something truly fascinating, however, is Orm, the line-like scripture which was used in Old Irish prior to the language adopting the Latin alphabet. This is an incredibly unique script, and I haven't ever really seen anything like it. Polish is a really interesting case too. The land of Poland wasn't ever directly under Roman rule, and their language is Slavic, meaning it has no relation to Latin. Yet they use the Latin script due to the huge following Christianity picked up here, specifically Catholicism. They seemingly didn't have a script prior to Latin either. It's not like they once used Cyrillic as far as I can tell. Norse, Irish and Polish all started using the Latin script because of the spread of Christianity across Europe, regardless if these lands were once Roman or not. Christianity is also the answer to the second step in the Latin alphabet spread, the step where it came to the wider world beyond Europe. In a similar way to how Rome claimed most of Europe during antiquity, the European powers that came in the aftermath of Rome would go on to claim other parts of the world in the 14th century onwards. The age of European colonization saw European languages which use the Latin alphabet start being spoken in other parts of the world, like English in North America and the Pacific, French in Africa, and Spanish in South America. This secured Latin alphabet using languages as the dominant languages in these parts of the world, but these languages were using the Latin alphabet before they arrived in their new homes, so that's not too interesting. What's more interesting is the fact that native languages being spoken in these places that Europeans settled now use the Latin script too, like Hawaiian, Maori and Navajo, and many Aboriginal languages in Australia. These kinds of languages got the Latin alphabet applied to them once again due to missionaries. European Christians in these lands found new people who didn't worship their god, so felt compelled to teach them of Jesus. There was of course a translation issue here. These European missionaries didn't speak the languages of these indigenous people, so the words of the Bible had to be translated into their languages. However, many of these native languages did not actually have written forms to themselves. Languages like Maori and Hawaiian were initially just oral languages. This was something of a blessing in disguise for these Christian missionaries. As they had no written forms at all, it meant they didn't need to transcribe the Bible into the Latin alphabet from their respective languages. They could instead create whole new written forms of these languages with the Latin alphabet. Linguists and missionaries got to work on grafting the sounds of these languages to the letters of the Latin script, forming written versions of native words that had only been spoken for many years prior to this. They chose to use the Latin script for these new written forms of languages because it was the script they knew best, and because of the whole Christian conversion thing. This is why today languages like Hawaiian, Maori and Swahili use the Latin script in their written form, despite having very little to do with those original Latin speakers of Rome. This is also the case for many other native languages of the quote-unquote New World. They were only oral, so the Latin script was implemented onto them. In many cases, this had nothing to do with Christianity either, but instead they were given written forms for preservation reasons, as many of these tongues are now facing extinction. Ultimately, it was via the Romans and then the Christians as to how the Latin alphabet managed to spread from Rome to pretty much every corner of the globe. But the Latin alphabet isn't identical in all these languages. Many languages that use it feature unique things like accent marks, and in some cases they drop letters entirely. The Hawaiian alphabet, an example, uses just 13 letters of the Latin alphabet. Yeah, it only takes 13 letters to cover every word of Hawaiian. We have a whole video about it. And while this explains why languages use the Latin alphabet, the opposite also explains why other languages do not use it. Languages that don't use the Latin alphabet tend to be ones from places that did not come under a huge Roman or Christian influence. Think of places like China or India, which were never under Roman rule, and Christianity isn't the biggest of deals there either. Places like Russia and Ukraine are odd ones. They weren't under Roman rule, but they are very Christian countries. They lacked the Latin script, however, because they came under the influence of Orthodoxy, a very different kind of Christianity compared to the one followed by Rome, one that favoured their own Cyrillic script. And then there's Greek. Greece was under Roman rule and is indeed Christian, yet they still favour their own unique Greek script. This is kind of an exception to the rule, and basically boils down to the long impact and legacy of the Greek language and its script. It's so old and influential that they have never wanted to get rid of it, and who can blame them? Without the Greek script, we probably wouldn't have the Latin one. I mentioned earlier the idea of a world where every language has its own unique script, and while we don't live in that world, attempts have been made to give languages that use the Latin script their own unique alphabets. The new Maori alphabet, an example, was created by Ian James as an alternative to the Latin script. It's an alphabet that respects the culture and imagery of New Zealand's natives. I even found an article discussing the idea of a future Narol script, with Narol to be in the language of the Aztecs, which in the past used a mixture of logograms and ideograms. Maybe one day in the far-flung future, the Latin alphabet will be used just for the dead language of Latin. English would have its own script, as would French, Swahili, and even something like Navajo. But for now, the Latin alphabet seemingly isn't going anywhere.
Name Explain depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explain videos, and your name at the end of the video with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/NameExplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and once again, thank you all so much.